the thing that I didn't think was going to get me anywhere other than just, give me better work-life balance and let me see my daughter. This simple act of, saying I'm going to restrict how many hours I work led to much more than I could have ever hoped.
Imagine if you were someone that had been working 100-hour weeks, potentially feeling burnt out, feeling like it's the only path to success, and then you were to discover that working less could actually help you achieve more. Well, that's kind of the game-changing realization that our guest Barnaby Lashbrooke had, and it's what's fueled the rapid growth of his company, Time, etc. Barnes, which I think we'll probably be referring to him as today, Barnes is a lifelong entrepreneur and investor, and he founded Time, etc., to help entrepreneurs escape the grind, reclaim their time, and get back to what matters most. So far, he's helped over 50,000 business owners take back more than 2 million hours of their time. Quite phenomenal numbers. He's the author of an incredible book called The Hard Work Myth, which has been endorsed by the likes of Nir Eyal and Sir Richard Branson. And it really challenges this notion of that working harder is the key to success. He's thought leader on productivity, leadership, company culture, and his insights have appeared in the likes of Forbes, amongst other major kind of publications. I've personally experienced the benefit of this. Barnaby, welcome to the Live Into Your Brilliance podcast. It's cool to have you here with us.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for having me.
Barnes, this question's coming. All of our guests do when they come on, because we want to get straight into your wisdom and how you see the world. And so the question is, if you could, just drop something into the consciousness of humankind that you felt could change everything for them, what would it be? What would be that profound truth or myth-busting illusion that you think could be an incredible gift for people if they had awareness of it?
I think you touched on it in the intro, really, but for me, the sort of most groundbreaking realization that I've had as an entrepreneur, but I think it also applies to really anyone trying to go somewhere or trying to achieve something in their life. The revelation that actually, working less hard, working fewer hours, directly helped me to achieve more. And actually, so I suppose it's, on the headline is, if you work less hard, you may achieve more. But actually, I'd qualify it slightly to say, if you give yourself less time in which to do the work, you might achieve more with the work. And I suppose, like, to tell the story, as a sort of lifelong entrepreneur, all I'd ever really known as an entrepreneur was to hustle and to grind and to work and work and work. And so that's what I did. I was the 100-hour-a-week guy. I was, working 7 days a week quite often, especially when I was younger. I'd quite frequently sort of work all day, work all night. It just sort of was what I felt like I had to do as an entrepreneur to kind of get ahead. And when I looked around me, or I read books, or I kind of looked at other people or what people were kind of saying in society, that was very much kind of reflected back at me. There's a hustle culture. There's this culture about putting the hours in. There's kind of quite deep-rooted beliefs in society that, you get out what you put in. What happened was that the company that I started got to about $1 million worth of revenue, and hit a ceiling. And that's really common, to get to different levels of revenue when you start a company, and to hit a kind of invisible ceiling, and you just can't shift that revenue past that point. Now, that was, really frustrating. But actually, what was strange about it was that happened regardless of the amount of hours that I was putting in. And so all of those hours really sort of amounted to a business that stood still. And that's really common, it turns out. So that's, really normal. I think it's something like 50% of business owners work considerably above the average number of hours that people tend to work. But actually, only about 30% of businesses survive until they're 10 years old. So there's clearly a big mismatch. And so I sort of slogged away for years, just keeping still, didn't really have time to think, didn't really have time to kind of figure out a plan until um, one night I was driving home, and I happened to see what the time was as I drove past this kind of petrol station. And I realized that I yet again, I think for the, probably the fourth time that week or something, I wasn't going to make it home for my daughter's bedtime. Um, and I just had in that moment this like crushing feeling of what's it all for? Why am I doing this? I've missed my daughter's bedtime again. Um, Even then, I'd have probably got home and carried on working. Um, it really sort of was an epiphany moment where I realized there was something wrong about what I was doing. And so the next day, I got up and I did something really random. I hadn't thought about it before, I hadn't planned it through, but I just said, I'm going to work a maximum of 35 hours a week. And I picked that figure because it was slightly less than like the average number of hours people do in jobs in the UK. Didn't really think anything else of it. I just thought that would at least help me get home to see my daughter, read her a bedtime story. Something really strange then happened. So, on the face of it, what I thought I was doing at the time was I thought in a way that I was admitting defeat, that I was kind of hanging up my um, entrepreneur identity and saying, well, maybe I'm not going to be Richard Branson. I'm not going to be able to really um, push forwards as an entrepreneur. Maybe actually what I need is a lifestyle business. Maybe this is all about getting the balance right with my daughter and my business. My business isn't growing, so I might as well have it as a lifestyle business and enjoy life. But something really counterintuitive happened, which was as soon as I stopped working those 100-hour weeks, as soon as I restricted myself to 35 hours a week, the business started to take off. So I started making better decisions. I started delegating to other people more. I started thinking more about things. And the business started to grow really quite rapidly. And it's continued to grow ever since. I've stuck with my plan ever since. So I've never gone back to working 100-hour weeks. We're now at $15 million worth of annual revenue, 700 people, have a really thriving business in the US and the UK, and we're still growing. And I've never looked back at the moment that I decided that I was going to restrict my hours. I didn't expect this would happen, but it's exactly what happened for me. So some people, when I tell this story and when they read the book, are like, yeah, well, it's obvious. So if you give yourself less hours to work, it creates urgency. With urgency, you've got less time to do everything. That makes you do more. And so it makes perfect sense. And, maybe there's some truth in that. But actually, that's really unsustainable. So just creating like urgency for yourself and beasting yourself to get more done in less time, it doesn't work. It's really, counterproductive. The other interesting reaction to the book was that some people got quite angry about the idea that I was saying you could achieve more by working less hard. And it became really clear to me that the sort of myth, or what I consider to be a myth, that you have to hustle and you have to work hard, you have to put the hours in, and you have to get that badge of honor to grow a successful business. It became really clear to me that that's very embedded in society, that people are taught that that's the answer from a really young age. It struck me that there were people out there that were really scared that maybe the answer to where they wanted to get to with their business isn't putting those hours in. It's not working harder and harder. Because actually, for a lot of us, that's the only thing we've ever been taught. It's the only thing we know.
You said you saw the time on the garage, and there's that moment, and then you said like it felt like admitting defeat and hanging up your identity. And then I'm just linking that to what you said here. It's like people get angry, and I'm curious if like
Yeah,
is
yeah.
there like what's the link that you see between those two things? Because it strikes me that you kind of had to face that that, what's the word I'm looking for, that kind of that challenge, that crisis almost of identity. Like, what does this mean about me? So I'm just curious to kind of tap in on that. Like, what is it? What do you see that's going on there?
So much of embarking on an entrepreneurial journey is about belief, and it's about aspiration, and it's about not necessarily knowing what all the answers are or how you're going to get to where you want to go, but keeping that place that you're trying to get to in your mind. And we probably do that um, by sort of blending lots of different ideas together. So for me, it was looking at really successful entrepreneurs who'd done really well for themselves, and kind of modeling what I was doing on them, to some degree. And that was kind of my aspiration, probably. And what went through my mind when I thought I've got to do something about this, and I'm just going to have to scale back the hours I'm doing, was that I was kind of giving up on that dream. That I was, my belief was so strong that you had to work hard, that it was all about hustling and putting the hours in, and persisting until you made it. My belief was so strong that I believed in that moment I was kind of giving up on that, at least for a while, and that I was going to, maybe have a smaller business that, maybe wouldn't really go places, but that at least that would enable me to see my daughter and to sort of balance life. I discovered that there's kind of a much deeper reason, I think, behind why this worked so well for me. And it's actually something quite profound. It's a really human, visceral thing. So it's nothing to do with the hours. It's nothing to do with delegation, productivity, anything like that. What I discovered was that this is all about pain, which is really sort of, it blindsided me, but it just hit me that this is all about a pain. And I'll try and explain what I mean by that. When you're busy and when you're really trying to drive something forward, and in my case, it was a business. In lots of other cases, it's, a career. It might be, academic achievement. But when you're really trying to, change the world, or you're trying to achieve more than you know that you're capable of, there's an inevitable kind of pain, as I call it, that sits in the middle of that kind of life. If you've got a pursuit that you're following, there's a pain that you will inevitably feel. Now, I use the word pain, but everyone's different. There are different words for it. So some people would know it as guilt. Some people would know it as pain. I think other people would know it maybe as friction or feeling uncomfortable. I think it's different for everyone, but it's there in almost everyone you speak to who's trying to do something different, who's trying to push themselves. And that pain or guilt or friction or whatever you want to call it is caused primarily by simply not being able to do all the things that we want to do. And you can kind of put on top of that facing a huge number of things that we want to do. And if you speak to entrepreneurs in particular, and we've, at Time Etc., we've helped, I think, 50,000 entrepreneurs since we started. If you speak to them, this is what they will tell you, that they come to us with this huge amount of pain because they have an overwhelming list of things that they are just driven to do in their life. And that can be, in the form of a to-do list of things they've got to do right now, but it can also be hopes, aspirations, milestones, goals, lots of other things that they want to get done. And that those things are all sitting there, and they're all there all the time. And you can't really have that drive and have those things sitting there without feeling a pain. Because unless you're going to find some magic way of, getting everything done on your to-do list every day or every week, or, reaching all of your goals, all of your aspirations, you are going to have a certain amount of pain knocking around all this stuff.
When you said about pain, I've thought about you and your daughter. And I was just curious, like I have a sense that there's the pain and the guilt that we feel and people feel, which is I've got all these things that I want to do. I've got this big dream. And so there's the pain that an entrepreneur, let's say, feels in the context of their dream aspirational vision for what they want to create in the world. And then my hunch is that that is compounded dramatically by the pain they feel relative to all the things they want to do in their life outside of the business as well.
I think it comes from everywhere, and some of it's long term, but actually some of it's really short term. And how this tends to manifest with the people that I've spoken to is that it's felt normally after a period of work. And so I'll give you some examples to kind of make that come alive. So the feeling of, oh my gosh, where's the day gone? Where did the day escape to? That's a real good indicator of this kind of pain. The kind of feeling of regret if you procrastinate. So if you've procrastinated, that feeling that you get afterwards, which for some people can be regret, for some people it can be shame, guilt that you didn't quite do what you set out to do that day or that week. Finishing a week and it's gone by in a blur, and you think, oh God, I better do that thing that I meant to do this week, next week. Those are really kind of just practical examples of the kind of pain or friction that I think is present in the lives of people that are trying to achieve something. The sense of an unfulfilled promise to yourself that, you set out with the best intentions, and then, a month into a project, you're really struggling with it. Maybe you haven't got round to it. We're all carrying that stuff around with us. It's all, especially if you're trying to kind of push yourself. And then you can add into that, like, long-term sort of, I'm not living up to my aspirations. Maybe there's family members that had really high hopes for me that maybe I don't feel like I'm living up to those. I'm not seeing my kids as much as I want to. I'm not being there for them. It's basically, it's all around us. But what I identified was it tends to really trigger for people after a period of work. So, it'll be on a Friday when you can't do any more, and you have all of that kind of sense then, when you need to stop. And a really common example is you procrastinated in the morning because it took you ages to get going on the thing that you set out to do that day, and you don't quite finish it. So by the end of the day, you're going to feel this really strong sense of regret that, if only I could go back in time and not procrastinate. The problem with the pain is that we try to avoid it. And so it's why we procrastinate. It's a driver of procrastination, because it's much easier to procrastinate than it is to face this kind of pain over what we're doing. It's why we work on things that aren't important, because it's much easier to do that than sort of face up to the big, scary thing that's, going to really potentially push us forward. But it's also why people distract themselves constantly, which is a really dangerous thing for especially entrepreneurs. So it's why Mark Zuckerberg is so rich, right? Because everyone sat there sort of, it's easier to scroll through Instagram than it is to think about something really big that you want to do in your business.
Like, I'm feeling it right now. All this, almost like that real sense of that, what that feels like. And I can, so I'm kind of, how do you face into that pain? Like, what is it that you see or have seen that's like the antidote? And this feels like what you've done. Like, there's something here which is like, I can sense that there's a piece of dynamite coming that's about to blow up a whole illusion and point to something new. And I'm kind of curious as to what's the way through that pain, that guilt, that friction.
You can't make this pain go away. It's inevitable for everyone that's trying to achieve something in their life, for everyone that's kind of driven. This pain is going to be there in one form or another, whether you call it pain or guilt or, regret. There's going to be tons of that swimming around, because chances are you have too much that you want to do, not enough time in which to do it. What I realized had happened when I switched to working these shorter weeks is that I was forced to kind of stare that pain right between the eyes at the start of every week. So I would sit there and I'd look at my to-do list, and because I knew I could only work 35 hours this week, I would look at things on my to-do list that I really loved the idea of doing, like stuff that I thought was gold dust, like great ideas, things I wanted to develop. And I'd look at them and I'd feel this like crushing pain that I know I can't do it because I've got 35 hours and I've got to do all this other stuff over here. And what I realized was I'd inadvertently forced myself into kind of experiencing those feelings before I did the work. And so I wasn't experiencing them as regret or guilt or shame or anything at the end. I was kind of experiencing them live. This kind of sinking feeling that I couldn't do it all, having to let go of ideas that I really, really wanted to do. And so I went from feeling that kind of all that regret and pain, when I was driving home at the end of a long day, or, when another year had gone by and I hadn't kind of achieved those business milestones that I really wanted to achieve. I'd kind of accidentally gone from feeling that when it was too late to do anything with it, to feeling that right when I could use that pain to kind of drive what I was doing, and turning that kind of those same sets of emotions that I was feeling kind of when it was too late before, turning those into a really helpful energy for me to kind of decide what I was going to work on, or be more efficient with my time, Or, if I saw something on my to-do list that I felt really strong pain when I realized I wasn't going to get to it this week, I found things like it. That was a really, really good driver for delegation, for example. It was a really good excuse for me to say, right, well, what else can I take off my to-do list and offload onto someone else? Something I'd never really been any good at doing before I cut down my hours. And so I think as an entrepreneur or anyone that's trying to sort of strive to achieve more, you can take the kind of pain of not being able to reach everything that you want to do, and you can take control of it and use it to really to your advantage to help you achieve more. And I think that's exactly what happened to me when I cut down to these 35 hours. I think it moved that pain from being, an exhausted pain at the end of a week's work to something that I had to face. And because I had to face it, it helped me kind of get much better at deciding what I really wanted to do with my life, what I really wanted to spend my week working on, what I could really feel excited about this week that I wouldn't procrastinate over.
I think, Barnes, I think that is what you've just said there, if to me, is like the key to this. Because, and this might sound, it might sound, I don't know how it's going to sound, but as you were saying there, that you were looking at your weeks, and I think people do look at this and look at their week and they go, oh, there's so many things that I want to do. And I don't really buy it. I'm like, I don't think anybody really wants to do all those things. And the bit you said there, like the bit that I heard was like, in that moment, you had to face the choice of like, what's your real truth? What is the real truth? And the truth was like, you wanted to spend time with your family. It was a deeper truth than the identity that was there about an entrepreneur. And I guess the reason I'm zoning in on that is because I think there is pain and there's guilt, and I think the pain and the guilt is linked to the identity. This is just it gets linked to the identity of what we have created as the idea of who we think we should be. And like, well, if I am this entrepreneur, then I should be able to figure all this out. And it's like, what I hear is like when we drop the identity and we come back to our deeper truth, when we really listen to ourselves, then there's a whole different possibility. And I'm only like, I'm not saying I'm right on this. I'm kind of, and I'm curious if Billows is picking up, because that is the bit that strikes me, is that you, in the forcing yourself to be with what you truly wanted, you had to face you had to face into the truth of like, I've got a choice between hanging on to this identity or letting go of that and going with it. Like, well, what if I put what I really want up front? What if I trust myself? And the word that was coming to my mind listening to you is like, each week being really mindful of like, what is it? Like, where am I being drawn to? And the reason I say that is because I sense that is such a big challenge for everyone when it comes to time, is the idea that they think they have to do all these things versus having a deeper a deeper connection to what's most important for them, what's most important to them, what they care about the most, and letting go. And so, because I'm I'm not sure that like we have to, I wonder if like guilt is a non-negotiable. Like I from chatting to you a couple of times, I don't sense that you carry much guilt and pain and friction with you these days.
No, I mean, I don't think it's I don't think it's easy, but I think I face that kind of I face that almost routinely when I'm setting out what I'm going to do. And I think, just to go back to that point, I think you're absolutely right about this being a sort of, it's a letting go of an aspiration where the only way of reaching that aspiration is to just sort of close your eyes and work hard and hope for the best and churn and churn and churn and just try and get there. And that's what I think society teaches people is, you can achieve anything you set out to do, pick a role model, pick someone you aspire to be, and then work really, really, really hard and don't stop. And then eventually you might get there. And I think this is really a question of intent, because what it did for me was it made me have to face, just like you've said, the reality of what I was trying to do. And I didn't really have to do that before. If you've got 100 hours a week to work and you can work at the weekends and you're just going to work and work and work, and hopefully, you'll get there one day, you don't have to face the reality. You might feel it as this pain that I've referred to, and as regret or guilt or shame or whatever. And I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs that are certainly feeling it, really, really strong ways, when they spend all weekend working when they didn't intend to, don't miss out on time with their kids, etc. But the problem is that's fleeting, it resets, and you kind of carry on, and the next week repeats and repeats and repeats. And it's what I hear all the time when I speak to people. I think what it did for me, the side effect of that sort of rash decision I made to cut down my hours was it meant that I had to face, like, well, where are my minutes going this week? What am I spending? What's really important to me? Like you say, I had to face abandoning ideas. I had to look at ideas I thought were really good and sort of say, well, I can't do it. Whereas before I would just have that idea sitting on my list, just be one of the things kind of adding to the pressure on me. This sort of unrealistic idea that I would one day get to it. And then I had to do other things. Like, if you're looking at, my case, I was looking at a week that suddenly was less big than it was before. I then also had to be really sort of intent filled with cutting down on things like social media or reading the news, because suddenly, actually, I didn't really have time to do those things. But I saw it really clearly once I'd kind of let go. It's not letting go of the aspiration, it's letting go of the aspiration and the sense that how you achieve that aspiration is just a blur of work until you get there. That's what it's letting go of.
Something that has just come up for me as I listen to you, and that piece in particular, I'd love you to talk about judgment of the self, and how has your sort of relationship with yourself changed? What have you seen? How do you think about judgment in the context of the journey you've been on?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think what's clear to me is that when I was in that place that I see a lot of people in, there was huge amounts of judgment against against myself, I think. And that's really where this revelation that the pain is involved in this, and that it's really, at this kind of deep level, is that, there was constant judgment about what I wasn't achieving or what I hadn't managed to do. A constant sense that, you should be able to achieve that. And if other people can, then you should be able to. And so that, that, I suppose for me, a lot of that was judgment against myself versus some sort of standard that I was trying to hold myself up to. And I suppose that the strange thing about, cutting down on the hours is if you shift that kind of pain driver to something that you have to face up front, really honestly, when you're saying, look, what do I want to achieve? In my case, that's kind of sitting down and saying, what do I want to do this week or next week? If you're shifting that kind of pain and you're taking control of it, then actually, I think what I found is the judgments towards myself become less common, because I'm tending to have a really clear idea of the, I don't know, 2 things that I want to achieve this week, and then just going and doing them, versus kind of living with that constant regret that I didn't quite get to item number 62 on my list or what have you. And so there's less scope for negative judgment, I think, and perhaps that judgment goes into deciding what to work on, deciding what's really important, versus kind of being all about retrospectively judging oneself and what you've managed to get done.
My hypothesis is that when we change our relationship with our logic, with our intellect, and we let go of the beliefs and the attachments, and we hold them more delicately. And Al and I always sort of use this metaphor of holding the butterfly very, very lightly. Then what happens is, and it happens at different times at a different pace for individuals, but you start to feel a lightness, and the ability to become more aware allows you to cut through. And what if I had to sort of in a macro way summarize what I've heard you say, is that you were able to, through responding to your feelings, not spending time with your daughter, you had this sort of epiphany on the road. I don't know what time of night it was in the pissing rain outside the petrol station, but you were able to fall into your awareness in a way that you hadn't before. You were able to start the process of letting go of the narratives that had anchored you to this existence and this profound sense of judgment. And as a result, you've cut so clearly through the noise that you're able to literally shed 65% of the dross and be on the lightning path, which is the 35%, the 35 hours out of the 100. And as you've had more confidence, and as you've had more conviction that that works for you, the judgment falls away, the imposter syndrome falls away, the results are there, this profound sense of just being on a path that is more akin to your wisdom than to your noisy intellect. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's what came through for me, like loud and clear.
It absolutely resonates, like it really does. And there's a sort of, there was a very life affirming aspect of this which really reflects what you've just said, which is that because what I did was so counterintuitive, to say, well, I'm deliberately going to work 35 hours a week, because that then really I started to immediately see this progress and this growth in the company and this kind of sudden upward growth path of me as well as the business. It really helped me to ground back to who I am, because it was probably the first time in life that I'd sort of realized that you can do things in your own weird way that no one else will tell you to do, that won't be society's popular view. And that you might find that works for you. And that if it does, and I mean works for you, obviously I talk about the kind of business impact of it, but also I've never looked back in terms of how I feel or, the kind of how it's affected me as a person. It was a really big lesson in not necessarily believing all the messages that you've been taught or that society seems to give. And I think that's why I sort of wanted to get this message out there in the first place, why I wrote the book 5 years ago, but also why I wanted to dig into understanding what actually happened when I did that. Because it's really difficult to say to someone that's, believed all the messages that society gives them and is, let's say trying to grow a business and they've got an aspiration as to where they want to be and they're doing their long hours and they're really trying to get there. It's very difficult to get them, I think, to do what you've just described. And so in a way, I want people to look at my example of how I did this sort of thing that I didn't think was going to get me anywhere other than just, give me better work-life balance and let me see my daughter. This simple act of, saying I'm going to restrict how many hours I work led to much more than I could have ever hoped. And I think you summed it up really beautifully because it is about, letting go of one dialogue, one set of messages, one set of pain, actually, one set of recurring feelings of guilt and shame and procrastination and all the other things that were happening in my life every day, every week, and letting go of all of that, discovering a new truth that was incredibly sort of private and known only to me. And it all came from this silly little change, just, an experiment to see if I could work less hours.
Barnes, every now and again, and no, actually, it's almost every time we have a guest on, they drop wisdom. And sometimes I don't even think that they know what they've just said is so on the frickin' money. Like you said, who knew? I just made this small change. And as a result of it, I just got work-life balance and I got to see my kids. And I'm like, well, I bet there's a whole bunch of people listening going, oh, well, I want some of that. That sounds amazing. And it is, and then you got this truth that was only just for you. And I think you've wrapped it up so nicely, which is when you listened to yourself. Where did 35 hours come from? It was your intuition. It's I don't know where 35 hours came from, but 35 hours was the number. And we use the word counterintuitive, but I actually think it's the opposite. I don't know where I heard this the first time because someone said it to me and I was oh my God, that's true. You weren't being counterintuitive. You were being intuitive. What you were running counter to, you were running counter to conditioning. You were running counter to
100%.
The identity of entrepreneur and going, and it was you were being intuitive, listening to yourself. And then it was and then you had to face the existential crisis of really listening. And Mark talks about the I and the me. And I think you dropped out of the me, the identity that was hustle and you dropped into your I and was no, I'm not listening. I'm listening to a deeper place. And then we face the existential crisis of having to be prepared to let go of the idea of me, to have a whole new unfolding. And I just think it's amazing. And I've realized now, at least for me, what I've taken about this is that when you talk about pain, I've really heard it's the difference between pain and suffering. sometimes there is pain. You know, we see choice. It's like, damn, like I got to choose. But when we listen to that and we settle in, we're like, I'm going to go that way. And then there's no suffering. There's no guilt.
Mm.
Guilt is the feeling when we think we should have done something different, or we should have been better. And then we go, oh, I don't have to feel that. That's just trying to help me see that there's a choice for me to make. And what I've heard now is you're saying, well, if you come back around and just sit with the pain of choosing, oh, what do I really want to do? And then you trust that and go in that direction, there is no suffering. There's just like, because you're like, nope, I'm going in the direction I want to go. And that to me is what's on offer for everybody. And I don't know again if that's resonating, but just as you dropped that piece, I was like, gosh, maybe it's that simple, everybody. And but you got to be prepared to let go of the idea that it's all about the hours, and that like that you've got to be able to do everything, and be like, no, you don't have to do everything. You can really get mindful and be like, what's my truth right now? And then solutions hitherto hidden from you will suddenly be revealed. Like, oh, I can delegate that. Oh, I can just let that go. Oh, I can find new ways to there's new solutions, because I'm saying, well, no, if I'm going to see my daughter, if that's my truth, then I'm going to just go with that, and I'm going to trust that then other solutions will come into play that I might not have to think about in advance.
I think like that's that's a really insightful look at it, which is really interesting to hear. There's sort of swapping long-term recurring suffering after the event when it's too late to do anything about it, which is, really like some of the worst kind, I think, where, you can't do anything about it. It's already happened. And obviously, you can work on acceptance and things, but then, I'm talking about really time poor, very driven people. And actually, it's quite hard to kind of, I'm not sure if someone had come to me and said, hey, work on the acceptance of your pain at that stage in my life, would I have been able to do that? So moving that sort of long-term retrospective suffering into what you just summarized really nicely, which is this kind of maybe a fleeting pain, because you have to face it. You have to say, well, I can't do all this stuff. I'm not, what 3 things am I going to do this week? And I can't do anything else. So that's such a great swap. And for me, that happened because of this sort of restriction I placed on myself. And, so that was a really good side effect. What's become really like clear to me is it's increasingly more important that people, and specifically because it's kind of my field, entrepreneurs who are trying to sort of really grow something meaningful, it's actually becoming more and more important as time goes on to make that kind of change. If you're stuck on that pathway as a result of the conditioning, if you're not really questioning your method, if you're, if you find yourself believing that it's all about putting the hours in, but actually experiencing these regular bouts of, regret or, bad feeling about that journey, or real life implications like not being able to see your kids, life is only going to get busier for you. So entrepreneurs are more pummeled than we've ever been. We're facing more communication than we've ever had. If you go back 30 years, communication was like 100 times less in terms of the volume that the average kind of business owner or entrepreneur is dealing with. And we're all carrying all this kind of chaos, distraction, and communication around with us in our phones. And that's going to keep going. There's more and more distractions. There's more and more chaos. There's more and more information out there. that's being kind of pummeled directly into the brains of people trying to grow their business. And so there's actually, I would argue, like way more reason now than even when I did it 6 or 7 years ago to, quieten that down, to kind of realize that you have this finite amount of time to, come closer to your truth, not the kind of pathway that you're on that you haven't really questioned. Because when you do that, you stop being as distracted by, noise. You stop being as reliant on what other people think. You can make decisions more out of your core, what you know you want to get done, what you want to achieve, the direction you want to head in. It all becomes much easier than the kind of place it's very easy to occupy as an entrepreneur, which is running at 1 million miles an hour, trying to listen to everything, trying to read all the books that everyone's recommending to you, listening to all the, content that's out there, kind of telling you how to do all this stuff, being all over social media, because actually the cruelness of that is we're told as entrepreneurs that's what we should be doing. We should be kind of engaging in that. And it's getting harder because there's more demands on us. There's more distractions. There's more chaos. And actually the messaging about, hustling and working harder is being amplified by all of those things. So, social media is absolutely fueling the idea that you should work harder and that anything's possible and that if you just do a little bit more, you'll get there. And so I suppose when you were talking, I realized that this is probably a more important time than there's ever been to kind of consider trying to get yourself to a place where, you're operating out of your intuition and you're taking control of it. You're doing that before you set out to do your week's work.
Yeah.
And not just kind of staying on the train.